Welcome to our short introductory video for JavaScript. So you've already learned Q&A markup last week, and you made some wonderful interviews in Q&A markup. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at another programming language, sort of what people call sort of a proper programming language, as opposed to Q&A, which is very much a tool for learning, sort of getting your feet wet. And for doing some rapid prototyping. We're going to talk about JavaScript, which is the programming language that runs on a large part of the web. And so the question is sort of what is JavaScript and where does it live? And it lives in your browser. So it's a programming language that your browser actually runs when it's looking at web pages. And programmers can use it to help provide interactivity on your web page above and beyond just the markup of HTML, right? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It allows you to change the display of fonts and make them look bold or italics, to include links. JavaScript allows for a lot more functionality and for what you might properly think of as sort of proper programming in the in sort of the application of logic and conditional statements. So that's what we're going to get into. Before we do that, though, I just want to remind everyone sort of the goals here in our class and how we're presenting things to you. So I want you to think about the stuff we're going to work through in programming as sort of recipes. This is sort of like a cooking class. You're going to come in, we're going to give you some recipes, you're going to produce some yummy stuff on the way out, but we're not necessarily making you into master chefs, right? So master chefs can improvise. They can be given a couple of ingredients and then make something wonderful out of them that you wouldn't have expected. We're just hoping to give you some recipes that you're going to be able to follow so that you can get an idea for how things work, so that the kitchen, as it were, is not a mystery. You understand a little bit about what's going on there. Really, we're about giving you tech literacy so that you're going to be able to be conversant in technology, so that when you're talking to technologists, you're going to be able to say, hey, I'm familiar with the realm of the possible. Can you help me do this thing I know we should do? Or you're going to be able to call BS when you're across the table from a vendor and they're saying they're going to do some stuff that you just know can't be done. So I just want to remind people of that philosophy. And I also want to remind you that what we're going to work on here, we'd like to have your fingers on the keyboard, follow along with us, but we're not going to ask you to do stuff sort of independently until we actually get to class together. And then, of course, I guess it's not going to really be independent because we're going to help you get through it. So the same way we did with the DACA interview last week, where we gave you a bunch of stuff up front, and then we came together as a class, and then we troubleshooted and we worked through things together as a group or as groups. We're going to do that again here with the JavaScript. So you had your mission part 1 that you did above, right? And there we asked you to make an interview, but that was something you'd already done. You'd already proven that you could do that with the DACA interview. So we are going to, in mission part 2 below, going to ask you to do some JavaScript. But again, we're not going to ask you to actually make anything new until we come together and you have that safety net there. So we're really about providing you that safety net for the enrolled students. For those of you who are just watching the videos and trying to follow along with the other material, my apologies, we can't give you that same one-on-one treatment, but you are, of course, everyone is, of course, welcome to use the Slack channel as a place where they can ask questions. All right, so we're going to start off with a discussion of variables, and you may remember variables from the documentation in Q&A markup, right? So there we used variables, and there was even a little program that showed you how you could ask someone their name, and it could spit the name back at them. My son was actually, my son's 6, and he was following along as I was preparing some of these materials. He's like, what's that? And we talked a little bit about it, and we made a little program. He just thought it was the neatest thing ever, that you could type in your name and the computer could spit back and say your name to you and say hello. And actually that reminds me, I think, probably of the first program I ever wrote when I was a little bit older than him on my mom's Apple IIe. She was an English teacher, and we got an Apple because of the teachers, Apples for Teachers program. And I remember programming that in BASIC, and it was just so cool. So remember, when you're programming things, you're making things, you're taking, you're creating something that used to not be in the world. So those DACA interviews, they didn't exist. You made them, now they exist, and that's really amazing. So anyhow, you have an introduction to variables. Variables are sort of containers for data, and we give them names, and then based upon those names, we can get the contents back out of the data. One thing I do want to just point out is what we're trying to do is give you a very introductory look at things. So we don't expect you to remember everything that we tell you when we're talking about a programming language or how to approach something. Learning a programming language isn't like learning French. You don't become fluent in it such that you can just speak in it without having to look stuff up. It's very much like legal research. You will remember certain cases. You'll have those at the tip of your tongue. But if you're going to actually have to solve a problem that you haven't seen before or do something in a new way, you're going to have to go back and hit the books and do that research. No one remembers all the syntax or how to do everything in every programming language. So I just want to remind you of that. Here's a little comic from Randall Munroe, which I think sort of encapsulates that sentiment. And of course, like everything else that we talk about, there'll be a little link below the video if you want to go and visit that comic. Anyhow, variables. Okay, so they're containers for your data. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're going to talk about variables. So the first thing we need to do is we need to be able to go ahead and actually play with JavaScript. So the way we're going to do that, you're going to go to a browser, any browser of your choice. I'm right now in Firefox. I'm going to right-click on the browser. These will be slightly different instructions for different browsers. So, but it'll be something similar. You'll right-click and then you'll look for something that says Inspect Element, Developer Tools, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and click Inspect Element, and that's going to open up this new panel here on the right, which is actually letting me look at the HTML here that's making the page. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to find this little option here that says Console. And what this console now does is it shows me an interface where I can type in JavaScript. And that's because, remember, JavaScript is a language that's used by a lot of web pages. Your web browser needs to know JavaScript so it can show you web pages and have you interact with them. And so you can interact with JavaScript here in your console in your browser. And so we're going to do that here. Now, these tools are here so that you can interact with the JavaScript that might be on a web page. It doesn't mean you have to interact with the JavaScript on a web page. You can just interact with the JavaScript that you sort of create. And we're just going to use this as a place to play around. Okay, so let's just go ahead and play around with this console here. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a variable. So to define a variable, we're first going to declare it. Now, it's good form to start off declaring a variable. We're going var, stands for variable, the name of the variable equals, and then the value. And that will declare the variable. You actually can sort of get away in some circumstances without putting that var there. There are also different things you might want to put there in different contexts. Why you would do that, though, is beyond the scope of this presentation. And for those of you with a little JavaScript experience, yes, that scope was a joke. If you didn't get it, that's okay. I'm going to make a lot of jokes that are probably just for me. It helps pass the time. Anyhow, we're going to define this variable. So we declare we've got var x equals 2. We hit enter. That variable has now been declared. If I want to get and we get this sort of undefined coming back at us because we didn't actually ask it to do anything aside from declare this variable. So what I'm going to do is if I just type x and I hit enter, then it's going to echo back at me the value inside that variable. So I've set up a variable called x. It has a value of 2, and great, we're off to the races. So let's go ahead and let's make a new variable. I'm going to do var y equals hi. Okay, I'm going to hit that again, undefined, because there's no output from that little bit I was doing. I just sort of threw something into a variable. But if I check inside y, I can see that yes, y has a contents of hi. Okay, so one of the ideas I want to introduce is something called data types. So variables have different data types, and data types are like the types of containers you use for your variable, right? So we know a variable is a container. We give it a name, and then we put some information inside of it, some data inside of it, and we can get that information back out if we know the name. We might want to have different containers for different types of things, though, right? So if you have some water, a bucket's a good container, but not a basket, not a wicker basket, right? The water will just go through. Similarly, there are different data types that you might use for variables in programming languages. The two main types that we're gonna deal with talking about right now are strings and numbers. Okay. Now, in reality, there are many more than that. Numbers actually can be subdivided into things like integer values and floating point values. We're just going to care about strings and numbers. And the point is, a string is a alphanumeric string, so it's like it can be letters, numbers, some special characters. It's just like a string of letters, a string of characters. That's the way to think about it. That's what a string is. A number is a number. Okay. So one of the things we can note here is that our first variable x was a number, and our second variable y was a string. Now, the reason I point out that these are two different things is because they have implications for how your program will treat the contents of your variables. Let's see how. So what I could do is I could write something. I could say x plus, and then I can say y. And we might think that if I do x plus y, well, that's sort of weird because those are not numbers. So what is x plus y equal to? Let's see, x plus y. And if I hit enter, and of course we get the little preview before the enter, so we sort of see what's going to happen. It's 2hi. So if I have a string and I use the plus operator, I'm going to just mush them together, because the way what plus means for strings is you just put them together. You're adding them together. Now that would be different, however, if I go ahead and if I take y, I'm not going to use the var now because I'm not declaring it. So I'm just going to say y, if I take that and I set it equal to 10. Okay, now I know the value of y is 10. So now if I go ahead and I redo that x plus y, I now see that what I get is I get x plus y equals 12. Now what's going on there is it recognizes that both of those variables are numbers. And so instead of mushing them together, it treats them as a number and it adds them. But what if I had typed y, instead of typing 10 like that, what if I had kept it in quotes like that? Okay, well, let's see. Think for a second, think what might happen. X plus y. So now we've got 2 plus 10 equals 210, right? That's not what's really happening. It's that one of them is a string. It thinks, oh, string, it's not a number. So what I have to do is I have to smoosh them together. And so now immediately you can see why thinking about your data types might be important. Because if you mess up your data types, then your program might be confused about what to do with the contents of those things. So this is just an introduction to the idea of data types. It's not something that's going to come up immediately. It's something I wanted to make you aware of, to know that there are different types of data that can go into your variables, and data type is a way to sort of tell the computer what they are. In JavaScript, the way it's recognizing that something's a string is because I'm putting it inside quotation marks. Right? If it's a number and I don't put it inside quotation marks, it's going to treat it as a number. If it's anything and I put it inside those quotation marks, it's going to treat it as a string. Okay, so that's something for us to think about. Well, we can, let's just go back. I'm going to redefine y there back to its sort of numberness. Okay, so it's back to being a number. And so now if I do x plus y, I get 12. But let's go ahead and let's do some different things on it. I can do x times y, okay, and get 20. And I can do other things, right? I could do y divided by x, I get 5. So you can do different operators as the way you would normally expect. I'm just going to clear this here so that we sort of get back up to the top of the screen. So now we can also do something. We can do evaluations, right? So we can do operations like you normally might think: addition, subtraction. Obviously, we can do y minus x gives us 8. I can do normal operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. There are other mathematical operations that you can perform, but you can do just general operations. We know that those behave one way for math, for numbers, but they might have implications in a string, right? The plus would add strings together, et cetera, et cetera. So you have these operators, but you also have another set of things you can do with variables, which is you can do evaluations, right? So let's see if I took x and I said less than y. Well, this is interesting. The feedback I get when I do that is I get back something called, it says true. So it seems to be actually what's going on here is there's an evaluation of a statement for its validity. Here I'm basically saying x, which we know is 2, y, which we know is 10. So I'm x less than 10. And it turns out, and it treats that as an evaluation. It says, oh, I'm going to say that's true. So if I took that same thing and I swapped that less than and turned it into a greater than, and I see my feedback is false, right? We can imagine this might, and you don't actually have to use variables when you do this, right? I could do, 10 less than 100. And it's going to tell me that that's true. I typed things right in there. We were doing variables because we're happy with variables. I'm just going to really quickly do one with a string. What if I do A less than B? And it says that's true, because in the context of string, the less than is actually saying, does this thing come before the other one if I were to alphabetize them, right? So that means if, and of course, numbers come before letters in the alphabet. So if I put a 1 there, that stays true. But if I take this and I say put a Z in front, then that statement becomes false. Okay, so we've got these operators. We've got the ability to evaluate things. We have variables we can put things in. And so we're beginning to build up a bunch of different things that we can do. So let's just remind ourselves, x is equal to 2, y is equal to 10. Okay, I just was typing them in to get them to echo back out. And so let's see, can I do another evaluation with numbers? Can I say, hey, are those two things equal? Can I say x is equal to y? I'm going to do something a little tricky. Let's see what happens. I do x is equal to y, and it spits out the number 10. What? Wait, let me see what's going on there. X is equal to 10, y is equal to 10. Wait a second. Oh, we already had seen the equals before. Equals is the assignment of a value to a variable. So we use equal to say what is on the left is the variable, equals what is on the right is the value in that variable. So obviously I can't reuse that same symbol for an evaluation. So actually there's a special set of characters that you use for evaluation. And it turns out that to do equal, you do x equal y. And then we get back to ourselves looking at an evaluation there, and I can see that's true. And that's true because we had set x to 10, we set x to y, so we had set them equal to each other, so they were true. But I, of course, could take x and set it back to 2, and now if I go x equals to y, now it's false because 2 is not equal to 10. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and reset that screen again there so that we're back up at the top. All right, so that's cool. We've got these, we can create variables, we can put values into them, we can manipulate them by doing operations, we can evaluate them by comparing them using things like less than, greater than, equal to. Of course, you can also do x less than or equal to y, right? And that's an evaluation that can be true as well. You can do greater than or equal to, etc. So there are links down below of all the different evaluations you can do and the operations as well. But let's see if we can use this to do anything interesting. So it would be nice if we could use our understanding of variables and their values and our ability to evaluate things to make something happen. Like if something was true, make this happen. So just so that we have something that we can do that we can make happen, let's first just show you something. There's a method in JavaScript called alert. And so if I type alert, open parenthesis, quotation mark, and then some text like hi, and then quotation mark, close parenthesis. And if I hit that, I hit enter, then you'll notice here on my web browser, an alert box popped up with the text I sent. So that's a method in JavaScript. Remember, JavaScript is about talking to your web browser. So this is a way that it talked to your web browser and it said hi. So if I click OK, I sort of get back where I am. So that's something I can use JavaScript to make something happen. I can get this alert to say hi. So what I'd really like to do is I'd like to figure out some way to say if something is true, make that alert pop up. And let's see if I can make that happen. So I know, again, let's just remind ourselves, x is equal to 2, y is equal to 10. Well, I can write a statement, and I'll write it out first, and then we'll talk about it. If x is less than y, then basically I'm going to want something to happen. Now, what I'm doing to get new lines without hitting enter is I'm holding shift enter to get those new lines. So I can say if x is less than y, then alert hi. okay? And now I can get to the end. Now I can hit enter and see what happens. Any guess about what's going to happen? What's basically going on here is I'm having a statement. It says if, and then this thing. We know the value of x less than y is going to either be true or false based upon the contents of the variables. So if I have x less than y, we know x is 2, y is 10, so that's going to be true. So it's basically saying if true, then alert high. Okay, well, let's see what happens when I run that. If I hit enter here at the end, let's see what happens. I get the high. Great, cool. So I can click OK. Now, what if I did, remember our little trick, so what if I change the value? What if I make x equal to 100? Okay, and then I use that little trick. I hit the up arrow twice to get the text back from before. So it's the exact same thing I typed before, and now I let this run. What's going to happen? Is it going to say hi? No, no, it didn't say hi. Nothing happened because x was not less than y, so that was not true. So what's going on here? This is a conditional statement. You often hear these referred to as if-then statements. So what you do in JavaScript for the conditional statement is you start off with if, and then inside a parenthetical, you write your evaluation, right? And that evaluation is like the evaluations we were just talking about. It's going to be x equal y, or x less than y, something like that. I should note that there are those evaluations, right? We know that, you know, a less than b is true, right? But you can also do evaluations like equal, say, are they the same thing? A and b are not the same thing, but a and a are the same thing, right? So you can do these evaluations with strings or with numbers. Just wanted to point that out. So we know that we have this if something is true or false, and then we use these curly brackets, and the stuff inside that, basically what this is saying if this thing is true, then do this thing, okay? And so you can imagine, here, I'll just clear this so we get back up to the top again. You could imagine if I take that and I have this here, I could do that, and I could actually, you can expand on that. So you actually can type else. Let's just do this. We'll say bye. Okay. If I run this, now what's going to happen is if x is less than y, it'll say hi. Else, so otherwise, it will say bye. So right now, if I run this by hitting enter, it says bye. And that's because right now, x is equal to 100, right? And y is equal to 10. So this part is not true. So it doesn't do this, it does this. So let's go to a bigger slide here for a second. So here is sort of a way to think about it. So here's an if statement. You have if, and then you have some condition, which is either true or false. And then inside the curly brackets, whatever you want to happen if that condition is true. You can also add an else statement, which will say, basically, otherwise, then do the stuff in this. And you actually can get even more complicated than that because you can add an else if statement in between them. So basically, you could say, if condition 1 is true, do this sort of stuff. Else, if condition 2 is true, do this stuff. Otherwise, in all other cases, do this, this other set of stuff. Okay, so that gives you some ideas for how now we can actually include logic in what we do. Now, that's great. We've got, we have variables, which are containers for our data. We can put information into those containers. We can get that information out by calling it by name. We have to be careful about the data type of those containers because we want to make sure we have the right container for the right substance, for the right data. We have the ability to make conditional statements that if something is true or not true, it will do something because we know we have these ability to operate, to do evaluations. And so now we just want to do one more thing before we leave you today, which is we're going to introduce the idea of a function. So a function is, so what you noticed is we had the situation where, you know, we were typing this if statement, we had to type it over again every time we wanted to use it. What would be really great is if we could have a way to reuse our code, to call it back up in the future. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce this idea of a function. So function, you start off by typing function, and then you give it a name. So I'm going to call this function speak. And the syntax here, you'll see, looks sort of like an if statement. There's something, a parenthetical, and then a curly bracket. And you can hear my daughter in the background maybe, and that is cool because she's there. But we have this function. It says, where it's called speak. And we want to have it do something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same alert, okay? And I'm going to say hi, okay? So now I have this function called speak, and then it does this hi. So I think you can guess what might happen here. And we're going to sort of decode more of what each of those little bits mean, but I'm just going to hit enter. So that thing's now in there. I can now call that. If I type out speak, parenthetical blank like that, then look, we get our little hi showing up here on the side. Okay. So, and I can re-invoke it anytime. So what's really going on? I'm going to go back up to our function. So I have this function. Functions, the word function is saying, hey, this next thing is going to be a function. And then I give the name of the function, and then I have this parenthetical. And that parenthetical is there because I actually can pass values to my function. I can pass variables to my function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass something, and I'm going to say text. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a variable with the name text, which will be accessible to anything inside these curly braces. Okay, so there's now effectively, when I call this, there's going to be a variable inside these curly braces called text that these things can accept. And so I'm going to replace this hi with that variable. And what's going on here is this alert method. Remember, we just put whatever we want to type, and whatever we want to sort of echo back to the screen, we put it there. And so here we're saying speak text and then alert text. And so what that looks like, let's see what it looks like, and then I think it'll make a little more sense. If we create that function, so we just overwrote the old function because it had the same name. But now if I go ahead and I do speak, and instead of just leaving it blank, I say, hey there, and I do this. Now my window pops up and it says, hey there. Well, how is it doing that? The way it's doing that is this becomes the value. So it's almost like I have a variable called text, and I set it equal to hey there, right? That's kind of what it's like, except that variable is only visible inside this function, so between these curly Q braces. So, and you can do different things. You can send more than one variable in, but this is a function. And you can use functions to take in variables and to do certain things with them and to repeat those processes over and over again. We're going to see more of that in our mission part 2. And Abigail's in the background there having a good time. But that, I think, basically takes care of what we're going to talk about here today in this part. So hopefully you followed along. You did some of this in your console as well. You've got this idea. We've got variables. We've got data types, which are the different types of containers for those variables. Variables have names, so we can call back the content of those variables. We can do operations on those variables, things like addition, subtraction, multiplication. We can do evaluations on those variables to say, is this thing equal to that? Is this thing less than, etc. Links to lists of all of those are below for JavaScript. And then we also have these conditional statements. We can do if something's true, do something. And we have functions, which are our ability to sort of repeat code over and over again. So of course you can take an if statement and you can put it inside a function, right? So you could have different variables coming in and you can start to mix and match them, and we'll play with that more in the mission part 2 below. But I think we've covered a lot there, and I'm really excited to help you put that together when we meet back up on Monday. And we're going to start using that right there below in mission part 2. But remember, don't worry, you're not going to be asked to do anything independently. We'll get back together on Monday. Well, unless of course you're an unregistered student and you're just watching the videos, then you're going to have to sort of get through on your own. But everyone else, we'll see you in class on Monday, and we'll get you there. But now you've learned to write something in 2 programming languages in 2 weeks. You got Q&A markup, and then you got some JavaScript, and we're just gonna keep building on from here. And I think you're gonna be excited about the stuff we're gonna be able to do after you watch that next video. All right, cheers.